Welcome to the Economist Word Spotlight. When you're reading about these high-stakes international alliances, the meetings, the pacts, the military deals, how much political subtext do we actually miss if we only skim the surface? How can just one well-chosen word change the entire feeling of a news story? Shift it from, dry reporting to real political drama?
That's exactly what we're aiming to explore in this session. We're looking at the article from The Economist called Australia's Ambitious New Push to Counter China. And we're going to break down some of the most evocative vocabulary used. The goal isn't just dictionary definitions. It's about understanding the geopolitical weight, the context each word carries in this region, which feels increasingly volatile.
Yeah, I love how the language in this piece really sets the tone right from the beginning. The sources suggest the vocabulary here is, deliberately chosen. It seems to capture both a dramatic visual and that underlying political anxiety.
Absolutely. When analysts write about foreign policy, especially in places like The Economist, the words they choose are often the clearest signal of their perspective, that their take on power dynamics, on stability, on risk. You can almost feel the tension in Canberra just by how things are described.
Okay, so the article's imagery starts strong right away. It sets a physical scene that, it quickly turns metaphorical. It reads, on October 6th, the prime ministers of Australia and Papua New Guinea stood side by side, buffeted by gusts of westerly wind in Australia's capital.
Right, and the key word there is buffeted. Literally, it means being struck repeatedly, sometimes violently, usually by physical forces like strong wind or waves. But its use goes way beyond weather. Figuratively, it means being hit or severely challenged by difficult circumstances.
When you picture those two leaders sort of physically struggling against strong winds, it is compelling. But is that maybe stretching the metaphor? Is The Economist using pathetic fallacy here, making the weather reflect the political mood?
I don't think so, actually. That's the power of choosing that word. They are literally being hit by wind, sure. But the context forces us, the readers, to see the parallel. It immediately signals they're standing firm, yes, but they're doing it in what's metaphorically a strong wind area of global politics. They're setting up this new military alliance with Papua New Guinea, and that move itself is challenging, fraught with difficulty.
Okay. So the image of them being physically unsteady sort of symbolizes their diplomatic position, like trying to get a firm footing while being blown about by these bigger external forces.
Precisely. It's less about it just being a windy day and much more about acknowledging that building alliances in the Asia-Pacific right now is inherently challenging. They're exposed.
Exposed.
Exactly. They're standing up to pressures. The opposite, politically speaking, would be being sheltered or protected from those forces, and they clearly aren't.
That instability, then, that sense of being buffeted, it leads us pretty naturally to the operational reality of some other existing alliances, doesn't it? We move from that sort of elemental challenge to the grinding failure of a major diplomatic group.
Indeed. The article uses a striking phrase to describe the state of the Quad, that security dialogue between the U.S., Australia, India, and Japan.
Right. The source quotes this. That work has ground to a halt because of a recent falling out between Mr. Trump and Narendra Modi, India's prime minister.
Ground to a halt. That's a really powerful phrase. It suggests a process that didn't just stop gently. It slowed down with enormous friction and then just stopped completely. It's almost a mechanical term.
Yeah, like gears seizing up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Used for large operations or processes that have just completely stopped functioning because of some internal failure.
So the Quad's cooperative work, which is, pretty critical for Australia's security in the region, has come to an absolute standstill. And the phrase captures both that literal stop and the political frostiness that caused it, those jammed diplomatic gears.
And what's really interesting here is the suddenness and the cause of it. This major geopolitical work, this big security dialogue. It stopped not because of some policy failure, apparently, but because of a personal falling out between two leaders.
Wow.
Yeah, it really reveals how fragile these arrangements can be when progress depends so heavily on, the personal chemistry or maybe the whims of individuals at the top.
So the breakdown is fundamentally relational, but the fallout is systemic. It forces Australia to figure out how to sort of restart the engine on this vital alliance. The contrast is stark, isn't it? It didn't gain momentum or resume, it just failed mechanically.
And this standstill, combined with that feeling of being buffeted, it pushes Australia into a more defensive posture. especially regarding its main ally, the U.S.
Yeah, I was really struck by the phrasing in this next part explaining Australia's new strategy. We read that. Australia's new and more ambitious diplomacy is also a hedge against growing doubts about America's commitment to the region.
Hedge against. That phrase is pulled right out of finance, really, but it carries huge strategic weight here. It means taking protective measures, planning against a possible future risk or loss, often by creating a kind of backup plan, an alternative, to reduce your vulnerability.
We hear that all the time with money, right? Investors buying gold to hedge against inflation, protecting the main investment against a possible negative. But here, they're hedging against their primary ally.
Exactly. And that's quite an admission of strategic doubt, isn't it? Australia's new diplomacy, this ambitious regional push, it's designed explicitly to protect itself against uncertainty, against the potential unreliability of America's long-term presence in the Asia-Pacific. The analysis suggests they're basically preparing a defensive strategy just in case the U.S. commitment becomes unpredictable, especially perhaps under certain political leadership.
That feels like a massive shift. You shouldn't really need to hedge against your closest security guarantor. It implies the core pillar of their security strategy feels, well, shaky right now. They're putting together a diplomatic plan B, a defensive patch maybe, in case the main security blanket fails.
The fact that they need to hedge reveals their anxiety. If you're hedging against something, you're actively trying not to do the opposite, which is exposing yourself to risk without any safety net. Australia seems to recognize that just relying on faith in the U.S. commitment isn't sufficient risk management anymore.
And the risk they seem most worried about being exposed to, it links directly to the source of that regional pressure, doesn't it?
It does. The article structure leads us right there, from uncertainty about the U.S. to the potential instability coming from China's power.
The source says, some fear that Mr. Trump will be tempted to offer China concessions as part of a trade deal that would leave countries in the region, including Australia, exposed to the whims of Chinese power.
The key word there, and it's a very evocative one, is whims, usually used in the plural like this. It describes sudden, unpredictable, sort of impulsive decisions or desires, things that lack stability, lack consistency.
That word choice does more than just say China is powerful, doesn't it? It characterizes the kind of power as potentially arbitrary, unpredictable.
Precisely. The reference is to the potentially unstable nature of China's political or economic decisions. The fear is that Beijing could suddenly arbitrarily affect smaller countries like Australia, maybe through sudden trade blocks or diplomatic chills,
Yeah, if a country is exposed to the whims of another, it suggests a power imbalance so great they feel they have no consistent way to protect themselves. It really highlights that deep anxiety in Canberra, that they could be sideswiped by an impulsive, maybe unreasoned decision from a much bigger power, just overwhelmed.
It creates a real sense of vulnerability, dread almost. The opposite of being subject to whims is operating in a predictable world, one defined by consistency or stability. And that's something the region clearly feels is missing right now. It's a very deliberate choice by the writer, I think, to underline the unstable environment Australia has to navigate.
And this whole journey we've taken through the vocabulary, from being buffeted by uncertainty, seeing vital operations ground to a halt, being forced into a reluctant hedge against the main ally, and fearing the whims of the regional competitor, it all seems to build towards this final, stark conclusion about the absolute stakes.
Yes, this is where the article really lands its punch. It boils down all this complex strategy, all this anxiety, to one potential point of failure.
The article concludes with this really definitive statement. Australians must hope that Mr. Albanese can keep the American president happy. If he cannot, all their ambition in Asia will be for naught.
For naught. It's a classic phrase. Sounds a bit formal, maybe. Naught just means nothing. Zero. Of no value or result. Paired with for, it signifies that huge efforts, big plans, all that ambition. It ends in complete, utter failure.
That is such a high-stakes way to end the piece. It doesn't just say, it'll be hard or it might fail. It uses a word that implies total wipeout.
It really emphasizes the potentially catastrophic outcome waiting for Australia if that single central diplomatic relationship falters. It suggests a kind of zero-sum game. All the planning, the defense spending, the alliance building in the region, everything amounts to absolute failure if that key relationship with the U.S. president isn't maintained successfully.
So all those strategic efforts become like a dream that comes to nothing if the U.S. relationship breaks down. That high-risk diplomacy Australia's undertaking is just rendered meaningless. The opposite, of course, being success or achievement.
And if we pull back for a second, looking at these 5 words together, Buffeted, ground to a halt, hedge against whims, and for naught lets us do more than just read the news headlines. You start to feel the geopolitical tension, you understand the strategic thinking behind this defensive posture, and you grasp the incredibly high risks in Australia's foreign policy right now. These words really transform the report from just a summary of events into, well, a narrative of high anxiety.
So, thinking about what this all implies, the article basically concludes with these incredibly high stakes. Australia's complex, multi-billion-dollar strategy could be rendered meaningless for naught potentially just by a single personal or political falling out between leaders.
Which raises a really critical question for you, the listener, to think about. If a complex international strategy designed specifically to hedge against massive regional risks, if that strategy is ultimately reliant on the personal mood, the consistency of one single, potentially unpredictable leader, what does that suggest about the fundamental stability, the reliability of modern global alliances, especially those so reliant on one major power? How much leverage does one person's potential whims grant them over the security and foreign policy of an entire continent? Something to consider.